Justin, my man, how are you?
I'm doing great, Glenn. How are you?
Well, I was doing better when I was apparently living in a fantasy world that America was rejecting socialism.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I actually think that the 2020 election was there is a lot of really positive stuff that came from that, without question. And I think that in many moderate districts, and I think that obviously in conservative districts, they still are rejecting socialism. But what we're seeing, what I think the research that we're about to discuss shows very clearly, is that in the Democratic strongholds, socialists are taking over. The far left is taking over, and that isn't just a theory anymore. I think there's real data behind it.
I mean, when you look at the list you compiled, you look at Connecticut, good heavens, it's going to become the Soviet Union soon. I want to go over how you picked who was a Marxist socialist. You based it on people that were endorsed by Our Revolution, Democratic Socialists of America, and Progressive Democrats of America. Tell me who these three organizations are.
Right. Well, these are three of the largest, very far left organizations. They're all well funded. Democratic Socialists of America, that's the largest socialist organization in the United States. They're not a political party. They're a socialist organization that helps with fundraising and helps with getting candidates passed, and they hold conventions and do stuff like that. Our Revolution was started by Bernie Sanders and people from the Bernie Sanders presidential campaign from 2016 to help win more progressive seats in Congress, and they've expanded their efforts out into the states. And Progressive Democrats of America, they've been around since the early 2000s doing very similar kinds of things. This is the AOC crowd. I think people need to think of it like that.
Yeah,
in order to be endorsed by one of these groups, you have to support the Green New Deal, Medicare for all, those kinds of policies.
Right. The Democratic Socialists of America reject an international economic order sustained by private profit. They all pretty much do. They are talking about giant government controls on just about everything. So you took the people that they endorsed and you looked at it, and what did you find?
So we tracked 266 races across the country. My colleague and I, Chris Talgo at Heartland, we spent a tremendous amount of time poring over the data and making sure that we got this right. Out of the 266 races, there were 200 state legislative seats that we tracked, 60 U.S. House races, and 6 U.S. Senate races. And what we found was that, and it's just absolutely astounding, 90%, actually slightly more than 90% of all of these races were won by the socialist far-left progressive candidate. 90%. It's absolutely shocking. And when you take those numbers and you compare it to what we found in 2018 when we did this exact same analysis, there were only between 80 and 90 races that were candidates that were endorsed by these same groups. And those candidates in 2018, only 40% of them were successful. And at the time, I thought that was incredible. But then they went from 40% in 2018 to 90% success rate just 2 years later. Jeez. And they had many more candidates, 200 more candidates, essentially. So this is just absolutely astounding.
So how many of them are open and how many are closeted, if you will?
Oh, I think that they're all open. I think that's the only way you can be endorsed. And to give you some sense of who these people are, because remember, a lot of these people, 200 of them, are state legislative candidates, so not a lot of people know about them. There's this person, Taylor Small, who's a state rep in Vermont. This person is the first openly transgender legislator in Vermont to be elected. They support having a universal health care for the state of Vermont. They support housing as a human right, ending the ability for landlords to evict people who refuse to pay their rent. Obviously, your standard increasing the minimum wage and all of that stuff, but also banning all fossil fuel infrastructure, which I think is gas stations and, I don't know, roads. Does that qualify? I'm not really sure. Defunding the police, It goes on and on and on. This is a snapshot, I think, of what your average candidate that's in this list is like. And then all of the famous people that you think of as well, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they're all on this list in addition to these state legislative races.
What amazes me is I looked at all the states, and the one that is overwhelming, especially for size, California has a lot of people, but and you expect it from California. Connecticut has, I don't even know, 40 of these people, and only one lost. That's
right.
I've always known that Connecticut was, big government, but not Marxist socialist. What's happening in Connecticut?
Right. I think what Connecticut shows very clearly is the strategy for the far left is working incredibly well. And what I mean by that is this.
Destroy a state and win elections?
well, sort of. But I actually think that if you look at what happened in 2018, only 40% of the candidates were successful. Now 90% of the candidates are successful, and they actually ran candidates in fewer states this time around than they did last time, even though they have way more candidates. So what that tells you is that they went out of their way to target districts that they knew the Democrat would win no matter what. And if you look at the average, not just margin of victory, but the average result is that candidates, these socialist candidates that were endorsed by these various groups, won by more than 20 percentage points in every one of these races.
Wow.
So that means that they targeted districts that they knew, no matter who the candidate was, as long as they had a D next to their name, they were going to win. And so I think Connecticut is actually a perfect illustration of this strategy because Connecticut is your traditionally establishment Democrat state, longtime establishment Democrats that have been there forever. And what they did was they targeted those establishment candidates. They kicked them out. They put socialists, they primaried them out. They put socialist candidates in, and then they won because the person going to the voting booth on election day, they don't know who their state rep is going to be. They don't care. They vote for the Democrat. And that's why they were so successful, I think. And if they take this strategy and they apply it all throughout the country, they are going to absolutely take over the Democratic Party. I think it's already starting to happen, and this shows it.
So you have 15 ran in Texas. 11 won. 11.
That's right.
In Texas.
That's right. Right, and I think it's the same strategy, right? It's you find the districts in Texas that are going to vote for Democrats no matter what. You kick out those more establishment, longtime candidates or incumbents in many cases, and then you put the far left people in those places. And if you actually go to the Our Revolution website, they explain that this is the strategy. They're not hiding it. They call it stacking the bench. They call it filling out the bench. And by bench, they mean these state legislative races and local elections, city council, county races, those kinds of things. This is the future of the Democratic Party. They know that. The vast majority of people in Congress right now were once a state lawmaker. Most people don't realize that, but it's true. And so if you can get these radicals fill out the bench at the state level and local level, those are going to be your congressmen.
That's your farm team.
That's right.